Normally when I watch a bad movie, what I feel more than anything is bored. I just don't care about what's happening. Alien Covenant, however, isn't like that. I do care about what's happening, just not in a way I'd prefer to. This has to be one of the most frustrating films you can force yourself to sit through, and it's like that for a very specific reason. That's not to imply Covenant only has one problem. The issues with this movie are legion. The most disappointing for me, at least initially, was that it didn't tell the story it was supposed to. Covenant is of course the follow-up to Prometheus, which many people also considered a bad movie, but that I actually liked in spite of everything wrong with it. That movie ended with Ellie, who I thought was a great protagonist, teaming up with David, who I thought was a great antagonist, and setting off to find the home planet of the Engineers, the mysterious alien race who created humans, possibly by mistake, then decided to kill us for reasons that were never made clear. It's an excellent ending. Not only was there still a lot to learn about the Engineers, but now we're left wondering how on earth is Ellie going to learn those things. If this one engineer killed 3 people, decapitated David, then set off to annihilate all of humanity, what's gonna happen when Ellie encounters an entire planet of these guys? How will they react? How will she react? How will she get the answers she so desperately seeks? These are intriguing questions that got me excited to see the sequel. But Covenant didn't give us that sequel. It didn't tell the story that Prometheus promised it would. The story it did tell had almost nothing to do with Ellie or with the Engineers. Instead, it's about an entirely different crew who stumble across the Engineers' home planet pretty much by accident, then decide on a whim to make that planet their home, only to discover David's been living here since the events of Prometheus, creating alien monsters that he then sicks on this new crew. Before we get into the merits of that story itself, we should acknowledge the detrimental effect that story has on Prometheus. Consider the terrible answers Covenant gives to the questions this ending asked. What will Ellie go on to learn about the Engineers? Nothing. How will Ellie fare upon reaching the Engineer home planet? She won't. Why not? Because she's either murdered by David in the most horrific manner imaginable, or she was already infected, possibly as a result of her alien C-section. Then after she died, David did all these messed up experiments on her. I honestly don't know. Similar to Prometheus, Covenant is excessively ambiguous, but in a much worse way. At least in Prometheus, the mystery surrounding the Engineers was also a mystery to the characters. We didn't know what they didn't know. But what happened to Ellie is not a mystery to David. He knows exactly what he did or didn't do to her. The filmmakers just left it out, so we the audience would be forced to come up with theories, which I consider cheap writing. Anyway, it's hard not to notice that David is whole again after being decapitated at the end of Prometheus. This is because Ellie put him back together. As to why she would do that, seeing as how David fatally infected her husband, which he then taunted her about.
Must feel like your god abandoned you.
Then tried to use her as an alien surrogate, which he again taunted her about. We're not really given a reason, but David does say Ellie was super nice.
You're very kind at heart, you know.
Okay, forget Ellie for a second. Do we, the audience, at least learn anything new about the Engineers? Not really, and the tiny amount we do learn makes them less interesting. Wow, that only leaves one question left. What becomes of David? Well, this previously interesting and nuanced character is turned into a comically evil, insufferably self-righteous parody of Dr. Frankenstein.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
So there you have it. Not only did Covenant not tell the story that Prometheus promised it would, the answers it gave to the questions Prometheus asked were so bad that it made Prometheus a worse film as a result. Yet as damning a statement as that is, and it is pretty damning, I can't say it's the biggest problem with the movie for the same reason I couldn't fault Prometheus for having a ridiculous premise, which it does. Unless Prometheus took place in an alternate universe where evolution never occurred, the notion of the Engineers creating humanity is stupid. Like, really stupid. But as film critic Roger Ebert was fond of saying, don't judge a film by what it's about, but by how it is about it. This is the same quote I used in my video on Prometheus to defend its ridiculous premise. You can't judge a story merely by its subject. Just because Covenant didn't tell the story that I wanted it to, the story Prometheus promised it would, the story of Ellie landing on the Engineers' home planet in search of answers, which I think could have been a really interesting movie, it's not fair to judge the film based on that alone. alone. So what about the story that Covenant did tell? The story of this other crew who against all odds stumble across the engineer home planet and fall into David's trap. Well, as I said before, it's pretty bad. More specifically, it is really, really frustrating. This movie should carry a concussion warning from the number of times you will likely facepalm yourself before it ends. And oddly enough, Ridley Scott and his writers made it this way on purpose. They decided to use what's known as an idiot plot, which Roger Ebert defined as a type of story in which the characters get trapped in a situation they could easily get out of with common sense, but they don't, being idiots. Before we get into why using this narrative device was a terrible decision by the filmmakers, first I want to be absolutely certain that we are indeed dealing with an idiot plot, because hey, I could be wrong. So I want you to consider the following 7 hypotheticals. First, imagine that you and a group of astronauts tasked with colonizing a new Earth have unexpectedly stumbled across a potential candidate. Should you A, orbit this place for like a week, take in the entire topography, send out probes, get samples, basically learn as much as you possibly can about the planet before you even think of setting foot on its surface? Or should you B, take your only transport ship and the majority of your crew and go stomping around soon after you discover the place? If you chose B, you might be a character in this movie. Next hypothetical. You're about to start exploring the surface of this recently discovered planet upon which the air seems perfectly breathable. Should you A, play it safe and wear a mask, or should you B, decide masks are for losers and you have rights? If you chose B, I really hope I don't run into you at Walmart. Third hypothetical. Having stayed behind with the transport ship, you suddenly receive a distress call that one of your coworkers is gravely ill, likely from something they contracted on this new planet. Should you A, don a full hazmat suit and ready a sick bay for this person to quarantine in? Or should you B, wait until this person is convulsing right in front of you before you even think to put on gloves? If you chose B, your understanding of germs is shockingly primitive. Fourth hypothetical. You and a fellow team member have just witnessed a large alien parasite emerge from a former team member's now lifeless body. Should you A, get away from this thing as fast as you can and only worry about quarantining yourselves after you're both safe? Or should you B, lock your coworker inside with the alien parasite because you're worried she's been exposed to a dangerous pathogen that you yourself have clearly also been exposed to? If you chose B, how exactly did you get this job? Fifth hypothetical. While being attacked by violent killer aliens, you and your crew are saved by a mysterious hooded figure who surprisingly lives on what you previously thought was an uninhabited planet and then leads you back to this enormous temple-like structure. Should you A, conclude this might not be a great place to colonize, radio your people to come pick you up, then remain in a tight circle facing outwards with your guns cocked? Or should you B, instruct your team to split up, look around, and maybe even bathe if the opportunity presents itself? Sixth hypothetical. You have just killed a huge predatory alien, only to learn that it had just claimed yet another member of your crew, and this is right after you witnessed your android host treating said alien like his pet. Should you A, shoot this guy, then get yourself and your surviving crew members the hell off this godforsaken planet? Or should you B, ask him to explain himself, then follow him down into his darkened lair, and then stick your face directly above this sinister-looking pod thing for no other reason than he tells you to? Last hypothetical, you and your remaining team members are finally being rescued, but just as you're about to take off, you see your robot friend waiting to board. However, you know that he is just about identical to your evil host. So should you A, ask him a question that he alone would know the answer to in order to verify his identity?
Cabin on a lake.
You promised to build a log cabin on a lake.
Or should you B, assume he's whom he appears to be and welcome him with open arms?
Will you help me build my cabin?
If you answered B to this or any other hypothetical, you did exactly what the characters in the movie did, and these characters are all idiots. Okay, I think it's safe to say that Covenant is definitely using an idiot plot, which in itself isn't too surprising. A lot of lousy horror movies do so in order to ensure the characters make every wrong decision they possibly can.
If you're in a horror movie, you make poor decisions. That's what you do.
But the use of an idiot plot alone doesn't explain why Covenant is so bad. I say that because idiot plots can be used in good movies too, like Dumb and Dumber, Forrest Gump, and War for the Planet of the Apes. What's crucial about these three films is that it's completely plausible to think the characters in question would actually do the things they do. It's easy to believe that Harry and Lloyd would drive 500 miles in the wrong direction.
I'm only human, Harry!
Or that Forrest Gump, having long outrun his bullies, would continue running across a live football field.
And there's Forrest Gump.
Or that Nova, knowing Caesar is being held captive, would walk right through the front entrance of an enemy encampment.
She go in!
While these scenes made me laugh, made me care, and made me scared for the characters, they did not make me want to smack my own face in frustration, because I truly believed these characters would do the things they did. However, I don't believe for a second, even in a fictional story, that a group of astronauts chosen to lead an interstellar mission with thousands of people under their care and nothing short of the hopes of humanity riding on their success would or even could be this dumb. If these guys really were so stupid to the point you wouldn't feel comfortable handing them a pair of scissors, then how did they even make it this far? How did they manage to not hit reverse during liftoff? How did they avoid crashing into the moon or ejecting themselves into space while trying to flush the toilet? Most baffling of all, how did a director as smart and as accomplished as Ridley Scott not understand that an idiot plot won't work unless the audience of a given film accepts that those characters, under those circumstances, really would make those decisions? That's the real problem with Alien Covenant. And it's not just the crew in this movie who's stupid. Everybody is, even those who were smart in Prometheus, like Ellie. Why would you reattach the head of the person who murdered your husband and tried to murder you? Or David, what exactly was your plan? Crash land on this planet, then wait for someone to come pick you up? You know you're like 50 light years from Earth, right? Even with this John Denver song broadcasting, the odds of you being stuck out here for all eternity were incredibly high. Even the engineers are dumb in this movie. Never mind that these guys were more advanced 2,000 years ago than we currently are, David is still able to exterminate their entire species with the same level of effort required to kill a mosquito. Beyond the logical stupidity of this, there's also the question of why. In Prometheus, David admired the engineers, so why would he wipe them out now? Of course, Covenant being Covenant, we don't get a straight answer to this. Instead, similar to the nature of Ellie's death, we get more theories. Against my better instincts, I'm going to share two theories that I've come across before sharing my own. The first is that David killed the engineers because he fell in love with Ellie soon after she put him back together, and he was heartbroken when she died, which means this was about revenge. Which is dumb. For one, I don't buy that David would fall in love with Ellie, or with anyone. And for two, the engineers didn't kill Ellie. David did. Whether she died because he murdered her, or she died from the infection she got from her husband whom David poisoned, he's still responsible for her death. The second theory is that David killed the engineers to prevent them from destroying Earth. This theory is slightly better, but still has holes in it. While the engineers in Prometheus were indeed planning to wipe out humanity before their little mishap, again, that was 2,000 years ago. If they hadn't wiped out Earth since then, why would they do so now all of a sudden? And then there's the question of why would David even care? He doesn't value human life. At best, he views people as expendable, and at worst, he's a sadistic monster. My own guess of why David killed the engineers is simply that he wanted to play with the alien virus, and the engineers were the closest warm bodies. However, while that does explain David's motivation, it doesn't explain why the engineers were so ridiculously easy to kill. But I have a theory for that as well. It's that Ridley Scott didn't know what to do with the engineer storyline. fine. He didn't know how to answer the questions Prometheus asked, yet somehow wind up back at the beginning of Alien afterwards, a movie the engineers are obviously not in. Unable to think of a smart way to bridge the gap between these two stories, he instead took a meat cleaver to the most interesting component of his prequels and went back to a more basic horror story format. Covenant is the dregs we were left with, and while it certainly could have been better if the characters weren't so stupid, the challenges they faced weren't so easy, and the themes the film attempted to explore were more deftly handled, I honestly don't understand why Scott felt the need to make Covenant at all. It's just not a very interesting story. The tale of how David fishhooked this crew, then absconded with the alien virus, doesn't seem worth the trouble of making an entire feature film. If Scott didn't want to make a real sequel to Prometheus, fine, don't. But in that case, let Prometheus stand on its own and tell a completely new story, one that actually deserved to be told and that didn't ruin some excellent characters in the process.
And I'm still searching.